They claim to be the lost tribes of Israel. DNA didn't confirm it, but what it found instead was even stranger. In the rugged mountain borderlands between Afghanistan and Pakistan, in the valleys and passes of the Hindu Kush and the Suleiman Range, lives one of the largest tribal societies on Earth. The Pashtuns, also known as Pathans in South Asia and Afghans in some historical contexts, number between 40 and 50 million people, making them the world's largest tribal group organized under a coherent traditional code of conduct. That code, the Pashtunwali, governs honor, hospitality, revenge, and justice with the force of unwritten law. Binding Pashtun communities across an enormous geographic range that crosses one of the most contested and volatile international borders in the world. The Pashtuns have been at the center of some of the most consequential geopolitical events of the modern era: the British imperial frontier campaigns of the 19th century, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in the 1980s, the rise of the Taliban, the post-2001 NATO conflict that drew in military forces from dozens of countries and ended inconclusively after 2 decades. Every major power that has tried to impose its will on this particular piece of geography has, eventually, left without achieving its objectives. The Pashtuns endure. And they remain, in fundamental respects, among the least understood major ethnic groups on Earth, a people whose origins, identity, and internal diversity are far more complex than any external political framing has ever captured. Part of that misunderstanding stems from the origin story the Pashtuns tell about themselves. Many Pashtun tribal traditions claim descent from Qais Abdur Rashid, a figure said to have met the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century, whose own ancestry is traced in some versions of the tradition back to Afghana, a grandson of the biblical King Saul of Israel. Under this framework, the Pashtuns are the descendants of the lost tribes of Israel, the 10 tribes exiled from the Kingdom of Israel by the Assyrian Empire in 722 BCE, whose ultimate fate has been one of the most persistently debated questions in religious and ethnic history for over 2,000 years. Communities in Japan, in Ethiopia, in India, in Afghanistan, and elsewhere have advanced versions of this claim. The Pashtun version is among the oldest and most elaborate, embedded in detailed genealogical traditions that tribal elders have maintained across centuries of oral transmission. This claim has been taken seriously enough to attract scholarly attention since at least the 18th century. When British colonial officers in the region first began documenting Pashtun genealogical traditions and noting the parallels with biblical narratives, it has been dismissed as folk mythology by mainstream historians and embraced with varying degrees of literalness by different segments of the Pashtun community itself, some treating it as literal biological truth, others as a founding myth that carries spiritual and cultural meaning without requiring precise historical accuracy. Then the DNA arrived. And it did what the DNA always does. It complicated a simple story, replacing it with something far more layered and far more interesting. The first serious population genetic studies of Pashtun communities appeared in the 2000s and accelerated through the 2010s, conducted by research teams working across Pakistan, Afghanistan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The results were consistent enough across independent studies to establish a clear broad picture, even as specific details of proportions and the interpretation of particular ancestry components remain subjects of ongoing refinement. Modern Pashtuns carry a genetic profile that reflects their position at one of the great crossroads of human migration, the zone where Central Asia, South Asia, the Iranian plateau, and the ancient Near East have been in contact, conflict, and exchange for not hundreds but thousands of years, since long before any historical record was kept of who was moving where and why. The dominant ancestral component in Pashtun genomes is Iranian, specifically connected to the ancient Iranian plateau populations that have inhabited this part of the world since at least the Bronze Age, and that gave rise to many of the languages and cultures of the region. This Iranian ancestry connects Pashtuns genetically to Persian-speaking populations of Afghanistan and Iran. consistent with deep historical and linguistic connections between Pashtu, itself an Eastern Iranian language, and the broader Iranian language family. But alongside this Iranian foundation, Pashtun genomes carry significant South Asian ancestry, connecting them to the populations of the Indian subcontinent and a smaller but measurable Central Asian steppe component, reflecting the waves of pastoral migrations that swept through this region during the Bronze and Iron Ages. And then there is the signal that caused the most discussion. A small but statistically detectable component in some Pashtun populations showed genetic affinity with ancient Near Eastern populations, specifically with populations from the Levant and the broader Fertile Crescent that form the genetic backdrop of ancient Israelite communities. This component is not large. It does not dominate the Pashtun genome or even approach a plurality. But it is there, in some communities, at levels that exceed what would be expected by chance and that are not easily explained by other known historical population movements into the region. Does this confirm the lost tribes theory? Not even close. Population geneticists are careful to distinguish between having some genetic affinity with ancient Near Eastern populations and being descended from a specific historically identified group. Ancient Near Eastern ancestry is found across a wide swath of Eurasia, having been spread by various migrations over thousands of years that have nothing to do with the specific Assyrian deportations of 722 BCE. The genetic signal detected in some Pashtun communities is consistent with ancient Near Eastern ancestry acquired at any point over several millennia through any number of population movements that connected this region to the broader ancient world, including but not limited to the specific movement of the lost tribes. The DNA can detect the signal. It cannot identify the route by which it arrived. What the genetics can say with more confidence is that the Pashtuns are, in the most literal biological sense, a crossroads people. Their genome carries the record of every major population movement that passed through or near the Hindu Kush over the past several thousand years. The Indo-European migrations that spread Iranian languages eastward from the Pontic steppe left their mark in the foundational Iranian ancestry that dominates the Pashtun genetic profile. The Bronze Age population movements that connected the Fertile Crescent to Central Asia through the ancient trade corridors of the Iranian plateau left their mark. The Greek presence in Bactria following Alexander's conquests, a presence that lasted for centuries in some of these highland valleys, producing a Hellenistic Buddhist civilization whose ruins still dot the Afghan landscape, left its mark in subtle genetic signals visible in populations of the region. The Kushana Empire, which ruled this territory from roughly the 1st to the 4th century CE and connected the Roman world to India along Silk Road trade routes, left its mark. The Hephthalites, the Mongol expansion, the Timurid period, the Mughal dynasty, every wave of historical transformation that touched this crossroads region is, to some degree, readable in the genetic data of the people who live here today, layered in their genomes like geological strata recording a long sequence of events. The Pashtunwali itself, the traditional code that governs Pashtun society, contains elements that historians of the ancient Near East have found intriguingly parallel to biblical legal traditions, concepts of hospitality, blood revenge, communal responsibility, and sanctuary that appear in both Pashtun customary law and in the legal codes of the ancient Israelite world. The Pashtun concept of Nanawatai, the obligation to grant sanctuary even to an enemy who seeks refuge, has direct parallels in ancient Israelite cities of refuge described in the Hebrew Bible. The emphasis on collective family responsibility for crimes and on the restoration of honor through specific forms of restitution mirrors legal frameworks documented in ancient Near Eastern texts. Scholars debate whether these parallels are coincidental, the result of common ancient Near Eastern cultural substrates that influenced many societies across the vast region connecting the Levant to Central Asia, or evidence of actual historical connection carried through population movement. The genetics neither prove nor disprove the cultural argument. They simply establish that the people making the comparison are not genetically as distant from the ancient populations they claim connection to as skeptics have sometimes assumed, and that the ancient Near Eastern signal in the Pashtun genome is real enough to be worth taking seriously, even if its precise historical meaning remains genuinely uncertain. There is a Pashtun elder in the Khyber Pass region whose family has maintained the same oral genealogy for over 30 generations, tracing a lineage that ends in the oldest layers of family memory. In a land far to the west, a land of rivers and prophets that his great-great-grandparents' generation remembered only in fragments of a story that had been told and retold across centuries. His genome carries an Iranian foundation laid down thousands of years ago. South Asian ancestry accumulated through millennia of contact with the Indian subcontinent, a small steppe component from the pastoral migrations of the Bronze Age, and a faint signal from the ancient Near East that his family's tradition has always claimed as its deepest root. The science cannot confirm the specific claim, but it cannot dismiss it either. The signal is there. What it means exactly remains, as it so often does, a question that the data can illuminate but not fully resolve. This is the most honest thing ancient DNA can offer on a question like this. Not confirmation of a myth, and not the simple demolition of one. Instead, a more complex picture, a population at the intersection of multiple ancient migration streams, carrying in their genomes the record of a geography that has been one of the great transit zones of human history for at least 5,000 years. The Pashtuns are not simply one thing. They are the biological accumulation of everything that has ever passed through the mountains where they live. And the mountains, as always, kept their secrets until the science finally arrived to ask the right questions. History is not written in books. It is written in genomes. And the Pashtun genome writes a history not of one origin, but of many, a crossroads story, an accumulation story, a story of a people shaped by the fact that every empire in history tried to cross their mountains. And every one of them left something behind in the process. The DNA found what the conquerors left. And what it found was not a single ancient Israel, but the entire ancient world, layered and compressed into the genome of a people still living exactly where the history happened.